The phone rang twice before someone picked up, but it wasn't him. A woman's voice, soft, amused, almost lazy, answered instead. "Hello?" For a second, my mind refused to process what was happening. I stared at the screen, my heart slamming against my ribs, my breath catching in my throat. "Who is this?" My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. Silence. Then, muffled movement, a quiet laugh, and the unmistakable rustling of sheets. Sheets. My stomach twisted into a tight, sickening knot. "Oh shit, hang on," the woman muttered, and then a familiar voice, his voice, muffled, barely audible, as if he had just woken up. "Babe, who—" And then the line went dead. The silence that followed was deafening. My hand, still gripping the phone, trembled slightly, my pulse roaring in my ears. My vision blurred for a second before sharpening with a painful clarity. I called again. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Nothing. My breath came in short, ragged bursts. My entire body felt like it had been thrown into ice water, a slow, creeping numbness taking over. No, 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 no. A mistake. It had to be. Some stupid, ridiculous mistake. And yet, deep down, I already knew. For months, years maybe, there had been signs. The late nights, the sudden business trips, the way his phone was always face down, notifications mysteriously silent. The way he had started kissing me less, touching me less, like I was an afterthought. But I had ignored them. Because that's what you do when you love someone, right? You trust them. You believe them, even when things don't quite add up. I forced myself to move, my hands shaking as I typed out a message. "Call me. Now." No response. I stared at the screen, my teeth clenched so hard my jaw ached. A fresh wave of nausea rose in my stomach. Then, almost an hour later, my phone buzzed. "Ethan, I can explain. Explain." I let out a bitter, humorless laugh. He called. I picked up immediately, my grip on the phone tightening as if I could strangle him through the screen. "Who was she?" My voice was deadly calm, but inside I was crumbling. Silence. I could hear him breathing on the other end, heavy and uneven. "Ethan." A pause. Then, finally, he spoke. "I didn't want you to find out like this." I felt something inside me snap. "So it's true." He exhaled, long and slow. "It's not what you think." I cut him off. Don't you dare lie to me right now." My voice cracked, but I pushed through. "How long?" "What?" "How long?" Another silence. And then, finally, the answer. 2 years. The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually staggered back a step, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter to steady myself. 2 years. I had been living in a lie for 2 whole years. I pressed a hand to my mouth as if I could physically stop the sob threatening to escape. Ethan kept talking, saying something about how he didn't mean for this to happen, how it wasn't like that, how it was complicated. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was staring at the floor, my mind spiraling through every moment, every memory, every late-night kiss, every whispered, "I love you," every lie. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know who I was anymore. I remember the first time I met Ethan. It was one of those perfect autumn evenings, the air crisp but not too cold, the city lights stretching endlessly beyond the rooftop bar where I stood, sipping on a glass of wine. I wasn't looking for anything that night. I wasn't expecting anything. But then he walked in, and it felt like the world shifted just a little. He had this quiet confidence about him, the kind that wasn't loud or boastful but impossible to ignore. His suit was tailored, his dark hair perfectly styled, but what struck me the most were his eyes, sharp, observant, as if he saw everything at once and missed nothing. I wasn't the type to fall easily, but when our gazes met across the room, something in my chest tightened. He noticed me immediately. "You're staring," I teased when he finally approached, his lips curling into an easy smile. "Can you blame me?" He shot back without missing a beat. The conversation flowed effortlessly. He was witty, charming, and had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the room. I don't remember how long we talked that night, but I remember the way he looked at me, like I was something rare, something he had been searching for without even realizing it. By the time he walked me home, I was already falling. The first few months were a whirlwind. He was unpredictable in the best way, showing up outside my office with flowers, taking me on spontaneous weekend getaways, whispering things in my ear that made my heart race. He made me laugh in ways no one ever had. He made me feel alive. I remember one night in Paris, one of those last-minute trips he loved to plan. We were walking along the Seine, the city glowing around us, when he stopped suddenly, pulled me close, and kissed me like he never wanted to let go. "Move in with me," he murmured against my lips. I laughed. "You're crazy." "For you? Absolutely." I moved in 2 weeks later. Our life together felt like something out of a dream. Mornings wrapped in silk sheets, lazy Sundays making breakfast together, nights spent tangled in each other's arms. He made even the ordinary feel extraordinary. When he proposed, it was nothing short of magic. Santorini, a private terrace, the sun setting behind him, painting the sky in gold and violet. He got down on one knee, and for the first time since I had met him, he looked nervous. "I never believed in soulmates," he said, his voice raw. "Not until you." I didn't even let him finish before I said yes. Our wedding was the kind people write stories about. A grand candlelit ceremony in an old estate, chandeliers glowing like stars above us. I walked down the aisle with my heart pounding, my dress sweeping against the marble floors, and when I saw him standing there, so sure, so mine, I thought, this is it. This is forever. We danced to an old jazz song we both loved. He whispered the lyrics into my ear as we swayed under the golden lights, his breath warm against my skin. "I don't think I could ever love anyone the way I love you," he had murmured. I believed him. Our honeymoon was everything I had ever dreamed of. A month in Italy, just the two of us, losing ourselves in winding cobblestone streets, tasting wines older than our parents, making love until the early hours of the morning with the sound of the sea outside our window. I remember one night in Positano. We had just come back from dinner, and I was standing by the balcony, watching the city lights flicker below. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, pressing his lips against my shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. I turned to face him, taking in every detail. His tousled hair, the slight stubble on his jaw, the way his eyes softened when he looked at me. "How lucky I am," I whispered. He smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you feel that way." And for a long time, I thought he meant it. Looking back, I wonder when the lies started. Was it after the honeymoon? Or had they begun long before, slipping between whispered promises and stolen kisses? I wish I could pinpoint the moment everything changed. But maybe it hadn't changed at all. Maybe I had just been too in love to see the cracks forming beneath the surface. At first, the changes were so subtle, so insignificant, that I barely noticed them. Ethan was still the same man who made me laugh over morning coffee, who kissed my forehead before leaving for work, who held me close at night as if I was his whole world. But something felt different. It started with his phone. It was always face down now, always on silent. Before, he'd leave it lying around without a second thought, answering my calls with a playful, "Hey, beautiful," no matter where he was. But suddenly, he started taking calls in another room, lowering his voice when he spoke, ending conversations abruptly the moment I walked in. At first, I told myself it was just work. He was busy. He had always been ambitious, always striving for more. And I loved that about him, his drive, his hunger for success. But there was a new distance now, something just beyond my reach. Then came the business trips. At first, it was every few months. Then, every month. Then, more than once a month. One day, I found myself standing in our bedroom, staring at his open suitcase, his clothes neatly folded inside. "Another trip?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. He didn't even look up from his laptop. "Yeah, just a few days in London. Last-minute client meeting." I hesitated, then took a deep breath. "You travel a lot these days." He finally glanced at me, flashing that easy, practiced smile. "That's a good thing, isn't it? Business is doing great." I nodded, forcing a smile. You're being paranoid. But something gnawed at me, a quiet whisper in the back of my mind. That weekend, I was cleaning up the bedroom when I found 2 plane tickets tucked inside his drawer. One for him, one for someone else. A woman's name. I stood there, my hands trembling as I stared at the ticket. My throat went dry, my pulse roaring in my ears. I should have confronted him right then and there, but I didn't. Instead, I waited. That night, when he got home, I pretended like everything was fine. I kissed him like I always did, curled up beside him like I always did. And when he fell asleep, I took his phone from the nightstand. My heart pounded as I unlocked it. He had never hidden his password from me before, but my fingers shook as I typed it in, like I was about to do something forbidden. The messages were there. Not many. Just enough. A woman's name, the same one from the ticket. I scrolled, my stomach twisting with every word. The texts weren't overly affectionate. No, I love you, no hearts, nothing obvious. But the way they talked, it wasn't just business. I can't wait to see you. Last night was incredible. Same place as last time? I felt like I was going to be sick. I put the phone back before he could wake up, my hands numb, my breath coming in short, uneven bursts. I turned away from him, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Was this new? Or had it been happening for months? Years? I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I watched him get ready, my eyes tracing every familiar movement, the way he adjusted his cufflinks, the way he ran a hand through his hair. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I didn't. I just smiled and kissed him goodbye, my lips brushing against his cheek. I love you, I whispered. He hesitated. Then, too quickly, he kissed the top of my head. Love you too. I watched him leave, and for the first time since we got married, I wondered if he meant it. I sat on the floor of our bedroom, surrounded by the wreckage of a life I thought was real. His shirts, his ties, the watch I had given him for our anniversary, the cologne he wore on our wedding day. Every single item felt like a lie. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't let them fall. Not now. Not when I had work to do. I picked up his clothes, folding them with methodical precision, not out of care, but because I needed control over something. I threw them into a large trash bag, each item hitting the bottom with a satisfying thud. His shoes, his favorite coffee mug, his lies, his betrayals. I moved through the apartment like a ghost, collecting every single piece of him, stripping my home of his presence. My hands shook as I reached for his framed photo on the nightstand. The same photo he had on his desk, the one where we looked so happy, so in love. Lies. With a sharp exhale, I threw it into the bag, glass shattering instantly. I took his wedding ring last. I had found it on the bathroom counter after our phone call. He must have taken it off without thinking. He didn't even have the decency to hide it. I stared at it for a long moment before tossing it in with the rest of his things. He didn't deserve to wear it. The apartment felt different already. Lighter. Or maybe that was just the adrenaline in my veins, the anger that burned through the sadness like wildfire. I hauled the bags out, struggling under the weight of everything I had carried for him. I didn't stop until I reached the dumpsters outside. My arms ached, my chest heaved, but I didn't hesitate. I threw everything inside, one by one, gone. As I stood there, my breath clouding in the cool evening air, I heard a voice behind me. Well, that's not something you see every day. I turned, wiping at my face quickly, my body still tense from the effort of throwing him away. An older man stood a few feet away, hands in the pockets of his coat. He was in his late 70s, maybe early 80s, with a kind but sharp gaze, one that had probably seen more than I could imagine. I recognized him. He lived in the next building over. I had seen him in passing, nodded politely in the hallways, but we had never spoken. Until now. He glanced at the overflowing dumpster, then back at me, raising an eyebrow. Spring cleaning? I let out a breathless laugh. Something like that? His gaze lingered for a moment before he said, That's a lot of stuff to be throwing away. Someone move out? I swallowed, my fingers curling into fists. No. My voice was steady, stronger than I expected. "I'm throwing him out." The old man blinked, clearly not expecting that answer. Then, to my absolute shock, he let out a chuckle. "Well," he said, adjusting his hat. "Good for you." I frowned. "You don't even know the story." He shrugged. "I don't need to. You're angry, but you're not crying. That tells me everything." I stared at him, caught off guard, and then, without meaning to, I told him. "I was married to a liar." The words felt strange on my tongue, but I refused to take them back. "He told me he was on business trips. He was with someone else." The old man nodded as if he had heard this story 100 times before. Maybe he had. "Well," he said simply, "you did the right thing. Trash belongs in the trash." I laughed. Really laughed. It felt ridiculous and raw, but it was real. The old man smiled, pleased. "You'll be fine, kid. Men like that, they think they own the world, until one day they realize they've lost the only thing that ever really mattered." I inhaled sharply, those words hitting deeper than they should have. "Thank you," I murmured. He tipped his hat. "Anytime." And just like that, he walked away, leaving me standing there, lighter, freer, and for the first time in a long time, myself. Days passed, and the silence was deafening. No messages, no calls, not from him, not from her, not from anyone. At first, I expected something. A desperate apology, an angry confrontation, something. But there was nothing. It was as if Ethan had simply disappeared. And maybe that was for the best. I focused on myself. I went on walks, spent more time outside, breathed in the cold morning air like it was cleansing me from the inside out. But the ache was still there, lingering in the quiet moments. One afternoon, as I walked past my building, I saw him again, the old man from the other day, the one who had laughed when I told him I was throwing my ex's things away. This time, he wasn't laughing. He was walking slowly, carefully, his cane tapping softly against the pavement. But then, without warning, his grip faltered, and the cane slipped from his fingers. His balance wavered, and in the next second, he fell. "Sir!" I gasped, running toward him. He groaned, wincing as he struggled to sit up. "Ah, damn it! That was not graceful. Are you hurt?" I kneeled beside him, already scanning for any signs of injury. "Just my pride," he muttered, attempting a smile. I picked up his cane, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Let me help you." Before I could finish, someone else appeared beside us, moving quickly and smoothly. "Grandpa!" I looked up. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark, neatly styled hair and striking green eyes, knelt beside the old man, concern etched into his face. He reached out, helping him up with a familiarity that told me exactly who he was. His grandson. "Damn cane," the older man muttered, dusting off his coat. "I told you I needed a new one." "You said you didn't need a new one." "Same thing," the old man grumbled. I hid a small smile as I watched them. There was something warm about the way they interacted, something effortless, something real. The grandson turned to me. "Thank you for helping him." His voice was deep, steady, the kind of voice you wanted to listen to. I shook my head. "It was nothing. You should have seen her," the old man interrupted. "Quick as lightning, no hesitation." The grandson smiled, and for a brief moment I forgot about everything, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the weight of the past few weeks. He extended a hand toward me. "I'm Daniel." I hesitated, then shook it. His grip was firm, his skin warm against mine. I told him my name, and we stood there for a moment, caught in the odd intimacy of the situation. "Well," the old man sighed, "I think I deserve a cup of tea after that ordeal." "Let's get you inside," Daniel said, supporting him carefully. I walked with them to the entrance of their building, staying just in case. The old man, despite his fall, looked oddly satisfied, like he knew something the rest of us didn't. When we reached the door, he patted my arm. "You should join us sometime. I make an excellent cup of tea." I smiled. "I'll keep that in mind." Daniel and I stepped back outside while his grandfather disappeared inside. "Sorry about that," Daniel said, running a hand through his hair. "He's stubborn, but he's tougher than he looks." "I can tell," I said, crossing my arms. "You live with him?" He nodded. "Yeah, he raised me, so now it's my turn to look after him." I glanced back at the door, then at him. "That's really great of you." He shrugged. "He's family, and he's still sharp as ever. Just needs someone to make sure he doesn't get too adventurous." I chuckled, something easing inside me. Daniel was easy to talk to. Intelligent, warm, effortlessly charming, but in a way that felt natural, not forced. There was no show, no pretense, just him. And for the first time in weeks, I found myself genuinely enjoying a conversation. That evening, I found myself staring at my reflection in the window, my tea long gone cold in my hands. The city outside was alive, people laughing, car horns blaring, lights flickering in a rhythm that had nothing to do with me. It should have made me feel less alone. It didn't. I had spent weeks trying to erase Ethan from my life, throwing out his clothes, deleting his messages, making sure that every trace of him was gone. I wanted to believe that once I did, it would be over, that I'd feel free. But the mind doesn't work like that. Even now, the weight of it all still pressed down on me. Not just the betrayal, not just the who and the how long, but the what now. Because before everything fell apart, I had a plan, a life, a marriage. Now, I had nothing but silence, and the knowledge that the person I trusted most had been lying to me for 2 years. I had been Ethan's wife, his partner, his best friend. Now, I wasn't even sure who I was without him. The thought made me sick. I clenched my jaw, swallowing down the bitterness rising in my throat. I hated that I still cared. I hated that, even after all this, some part of me still wanted answers. Why? When did it start? Did he ever actually love me, or was it all just convenience? Would I ever stop feeling like a fool? I shut my eyes, willing myself to stop dissecting the past like it would somehow change anything. And yet, as I tried to focus on anything else, my mind drifted somewhere unexpected. To Daniel. I had only met him once, only spoken to him for a few minutes, but something about him lingered in my thoughts. The way he had looked at me, not with pity, not with curiosity, but with genuine kindness. I barely knew him, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I wanted to. It wasn't attraction, at least not in the way I was used to. It wasn't like Ethan, who had swept into my life like a storm, pulling me under before I could even take a breath. Daniel had been steady, effortless. Talking to him had felt easy. I didn't even realize I was smiling until I caught my own reflection in the glass. A small, hesitant thing. I sighed, rubbing my temples. What am I doing? This was not the time to be thinking about anyone new. I was still untangling myself from Ethan, still trying to figure out what life looked like without him in it. I was still hurting. But I glanced back at the window, as if the city itself had an answer for me. If I saw Daniel again, would I ignore him? Would I pretend like that moment hadn't meant something to me? I swallowed hard, gripping my mug as I came to a decision. No, even if I wasn't ready, even if I was still scared, I wasn't going to let fear dictate my life anymore. If I saw him again, I would talk to him. Because after everything I had been through, after everything I had survived, I owed myself the chance to find out what came next. A few days passed, quiet and uneventful. I had fallen into a strange routine, waking up alone, making coffee for one, going about my day without anyone to check in on me. It was peaceful in a way, but there was an undeniable emptiness to it too. I told myself I was fine, that I was getting used to this new life. Then, one evening, just as I was settling in with a book and a blanket, there was a knock at my door. I froze. It wasn't late, but I wasn't expecting anyone. For a brief second, an irrational panic gripped me. Ethan. Had he finally come back? After weeks of silence, was he going to try and worm his way in again? I pushed the thought away, took a deep breath, and opened the door. And there he was, Daniel. I blinked, caught completely off guard. He looked as put together as ever. Dark coat, strong posture, his hands casually tucked into his pockets. But there was something uncertain in his eyes, as if he wasn't entirely sure what he was doing here either. "Daniel?" I asked, tilting my head. "What are you—" "Hey," he cut in, smiling a little. "Sorry for dropping by like this. He hesitated, shifting slightly on his feet. "I swear I had a reason for coming." I raised an eyebrow. "You swear?" He exhaled through his nose, shaking his head as if laughing at himself. "All right, fine. I don't have a real reason." I folded my arms, amused despite myself. "Then why are you here?" He hesitated again, then rubbed the back of his neck. "Okay, this is going to sound ridiculous, but I wanted to ask you to coffee." I blinked. "Coffee?" "Yeah," he said, then let out a small laugh. I know. It's probably weird showing up at your door like this, but I didn't have your number. No social media. No way to contact you. But I did know where you lived, so I figured." He trailed off, shrugging. "Worth a shot?" I just stared at him. Not because I was uncomfortable, but because it had been so long since someone had asked me something like that, so, genuinely, no pretense, no games. Just a simple, honest invitation. Something inside me softened. "Let me get this straight," I said, crossing my arms. "You showed up at my door with no idea if I'd even want to see you, just to ask me to coffee?" He gave me a small, lopsided smile. I figured the worst you could do was say no. I couldn't help it. I laughed. A real, unguarded laugh. He looked pleased with himself. "Is that a yes?" I shook my head but smiled. "All right, fine. Yes. Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," he confirmed, his eyes lighting up slightly. 7? I nodded. 7. He gave me a small wave, then turned to leave. But before he made it down the hall, I called after him. "Daniel?" He turned. "For the record," I said, leaning against the doorframe, "this might have been the most ridiculous way anyone's ever asked me out." He grinned. And I kinda like it." His grin widened, and with that, he disappeared down the hall. The next evening, I found myself in one of the best cafes in the city, sitting across from Daniel as he stirred his coffee with an easy, practiced motion. He had chosen the place, and I had to admit, it was perfect. Warm lighting, the scent of fresh pastries in the air, quiet enough to talk, but lively enough not to feel stiff. "You come here often?" I asked, taking a sip of my own coffee. He nodded. "Yeah, I like places that don't feel rushed. No pressure to leave after 20 minutes. I smirked. "So you like to take your time?" His gaze flicked to mine, something playful in his expression. "When it matters." A warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the coffee. The conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about our favorite books, our worst travel experiences, the oddest things our neighbors had ever done. He was sharp and funny, but there was also depth to him. He listened, really listened, in a way that made me feel like my words meant something. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about Ethan. I wasn't thinking about the past, or the pain, or the betrayal. I was just here, with him. By the time the check arrived, Daniel grabbed it before I could even reach for my wallet. "Daniel," I protested. He shook his head. "Nope, I invited you." "That doesn't mean you have to pay." His eyes twinkled with amusement. "Do you want to pay?" I hesitated. "No." "Then let me have this." I sighed dramatically. "Fine, but next time I'm paying." He smirked. "Next time?" I rolled my eyes. "You know what I mean." He did. And yet, the way he looked at me in that moment, calm, steady, a quiet sort of sure, made my stomach do something stupid. We walked out together, the crisp evening air wrapping around us. Neither of us was in a rush to leave. We strolled for a while, talking about nothing and everything. Sometimes, we'd run into each other near the building and stop for a quick chat. Other times, we'd take slow walks with no real destination, just existing in each other's presence. It was easy, natural, something I hadn't realized I had been missing for a long, long time. The past few weeks had passed in a blur, filled with quiet walks, shared laughter, and conversations that stretched late into the night. Daniel and I had never spoken about what we were, not directly, but the air between us had changed, grown heavier with something unspoken but impossible to ignore. I caught it in the way his gaze lingered on me just a second longer than necessary, in the way my heart quickened when he laughed, in the way we always found excuses to see each other, even if only for a few minutes. We never admitted it out loud, but we both knew. Then, one evening, everything shifted. I had just left work, exhausted and ready to head home. My bag was heavy, my mind cluttered with the day's tasks. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed. Daniel. I smiled as I answered, but before I could even say hello, his voice came through, sharp, cold, almost panicked. "Come to my place, now." My stomach dropped. "Daniel, what's... Just get here," he cut in, his voice strained. "Please." The line went dead. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I didn't even think. I threw my bag into the car, left my work laptop and papers scattered across the passenger seat, and slammed the door shut. What happened? Had something happened to his grandfather? Had there been an accident? My mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. I barely noticed the traffic, barely felt the cool night air as I ran up the steps to his building. My breath was shallow, my hands shaking slightly as I knocked on his door. It swung open immediately, and there he stood, Daniel, tall, calm, composed, and definitely not panicked. Behind him, his grandfather sat comfortably in an armchair, smiling warmly. The apartment smelled incredible, something rich and savory, mixed with the faintest hint of vanilla. The dining table was set, candles flickering softly, casting a golden glow across the room. It took me a second to process what I was seeing. What? My voice trailed off as I tried to catch my breath. What is this? Daniel smirked. His smirk, the one that had started to feel so familiar, so dangerously charming. Happy birthday. I blinked, then blinked again. My mind went blank. Birthday? And then it hit me. Oh. I had been so caught up in everything, work, my own thoughts, the constant weight of moving forward, that I had completely forgotten my own birthday. Daniel's grandfather chuckled. The look on your face says you had no idea. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. I knew it was soon, but I swallowed hard. I wasn't really planning anything. Daniel's expression softened. I figured. I looked at the beautifully set table, at the candles, the carefully prepared dishes. My throat tightened. No one's done something like this for me in a long time, I admitted quietly. His grandfather stretched as he stood, a knowing look in his eyes. Well, I think I'll leave you two to it. I have a very important meeting with an old friend. I turned to him, frowning slightly. You don't have to leave. He waved a hand. Nonsense. I was just the assistant in this operation. He winked at me, then gave Daniel a firm pat on the shoulder before stepping outside, closing the door behind him. And just like that, we were alone. The silence stretched between us for a moment, filled with the quiet flickering of the candles. Then Daniel stepped forward. I know we never really talked about what's going on between us, he said carefully. My heart pounded. No, we haven't. He studied me for a second, as if choosing his next words carefully. Then, finally, I like you. It was simple, honest, no pretense, no hesitation. A small, shaky laugh escaped me. Yeah? His lips curled slightly. Yeah. I swallowed, my hands twisting together. My chest felt too tight, too full. After everything, after Ethan, after the betrayal, after the months of feeling lost, I never thought I'd be standing here, feeling like this again. But I did. And I wanted him. I took a breath, looking up at him. I like you too. His gaze flickered, something softer now, something relieved. I was hoping you'd say that, he murmured. I smiled. You were pretty confident about it. He let out a low chuckle. Not as much as you think. I glanced at the table again, then back at him. So, dinner? He nodded. Dinner. And as I sat down, watching him pour me a glass of wine, feeling something warm and unfamiliar settle in my chest, I realized, maybe, just maybe, I was finally ready to move forward. The weeks that followed felt like something out of a life I had once dreamed of, but never thought I would have again. Daniel and I became inseparable. It wasn't sudden, wasn't rushed. It was natural, effortless, as if this was always how it was meant to be. We still had our long walks, our quiet conversations late into the night, our coffee shop moments where he'd steal sips from my cup and pretend he liked his black coffee better. But now, there was more. Now, there were the soft, lingering touches. The way his fingers would graze mine when we walked side by side. The way he would brush a strand of hair behind my ear as if he couldn't help himself. The way he looked at me, like I was something worth holding on to. I had spent so much time believing I would never feel this again. That love, real love, was something I had already wasted on someone who never deserved it. But then there was Daniel. And suddenly, love wasn't something painful. It wasn't something fragile, something to fear. It was safe, steady, good. One evening, we found ourselves on his balcony, the city lights stretching endlessly before us. His grandfather had gone to sleep hours ago, leaving us in the kind of quiet that felt right. Daniel stood beside me, a glass of wine in one hand, the other resting lazily against the railing. He looked so at ease, so effortlessly himself, that I found myself just watching him for a moment, taking in the details. "You're staring," he murmured, not even looking at me. I smiled. "Can you blame me?" He turned then, a slow smirk playing at his lips, but there was something softer in his eyes, something real. "I've been thinking about something," he said, setting his glass down. "Yeah?" I leaned against the railing, mirroring him. "And what's that?" He hesitated for just a second. Then, as if making up his mind, he reached for my hand. It was the simplest gesture, but it meant everything. He laced his fingers through mine, his thumb brushing idly against my skin as he exhaled. "I don't want to imagine my days without you in them." My breath caught. It wasn't a grand speech. It wasn't some dramatic declaration, but it was exactly what I needed to hear. I squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth of it settle deep into my chest. "Then don't." His lips parted slightly, as if my answer had taken him by surprise. Then, slowly, he smiled. And just like that, everything that had once felt broken inside of me, everything that had been shattered, bruised, betrayed, started to piece itself back together. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for things to fall apart. I had chosen to trust again, to believe again. And this time, I knew, deep down, I wouldn't regret it. As the city hummed softly around us, as Daniel pulled me just a little closer, I realized something. The past no longer defined me. I had survived it. And now? Now I was finally happy.